We left off talking about some of the major issues we can have if we have severe weight loss. So as you'd suspect, people that have, unfortunately, either athletic amenorrhea, so we're really talking about a lack of calories into the amount of exercise we're doing. And, obviously anorexia is just going to exacerbate those situations. Now, we did talk about, those situations where what's going on with female athlete triad, along with what's important with tracking athletes, and specifically how different systems of the body are going to start to fail first when we're in consistent situations of under caloric intake. Now, any questions over the female athlete triad or anything that we covered there and talked about at length on Monday? Okay, so how many of you guys have heard about weight standards before or have any experience in coaches using weight standards for you? Okay, well, what do you mean by kind of, Zach?
Isn't it like referred to your age and how much you weigh?
That's more or less just kind of just giving a weight. Instead, think about like coaches said that if you're playing this sport, you need to weigh this much. So the basic idea is, especially Tyler in cheerleading, where you can have coaches say that, all female flyers need to weigh 100 pounds. And it turns out, A, that's patently insane. And B, if you happen to be a 5 or 4'10" girl, it's a lot easier for you to be 100 pounds than it is for a girl that's 5'6". So like anything else, we should really focus more on body composition and just trying to be at a healthy one at that, and not focusing so much on that total body weight. Now, it's not even going to give you an exact percentage. Instead, there's always going to be a range. Like we want to be between A and B. And so if your goal is effectively to live as long as possible, if you're a guy, you probably want to have a body fat between 10 and like 18%. And if you're a female, you probably want to be between probably 18 to 28%. The basic idea is you're not carrying around too much body weight so that it's, beating down your joints faster and increasing your risk for certain diseases, but you're also not so low body fat that if anything happens, you don't have any reserves to fall back upon. So obviously, men and women have different body fat percentages. You're typically going to see about an 8% difference between guys and girls. Meaning if I was female, we'd expect my body fat to be about 8% higher. So that's just kind of a good little rule of thumb. Think of 6 to 10%. And there's still a lot of factors that go into that. Genetics being the major, elephant in the room, so to speak. So the idea is to focus mostly on not just body count, but performance of your athletes. So if your athlete performs better when they're a little bit fluffier, then by all means, let them compete there. If they compete a little bit better, a little bit leaner, let them compete there, but don't force them to be on one side or the other. In fact, I actually heard a terrifying story the other day. Are you guys are familiar with the uniforms effectively that cross-country runners wear? So a coach that I know told me a story of how previously the head coach, and this is like years and years ago, they purposely chose for the female cross-country team that those ladies would be wearing, because you can wear like essentially like what are like swimsuit bottoms for a female. So like, I think they're called like a bikini bottom or whatever for the cut. And then instead of like giving them like a full shirt uniform, they effectively had the sports bra. So they're effectively doing their cross-country meets in what was a two-piece swimsuit. And the head coach who told my friend this information goes, our female long distance runners were never skinnier, and we had one of the best years we've ever had. However, the best athlete on the team ended up developing anorexia nervosa because none of them wanted to be running around in effectively a two-piece swimsuit and not look good. So just because we can do certain things to make people focus on aesthetics, if your sport is aesthetics, aka you're doing bodybuilding, figure fitness, etc. competitions, yes, you're going to have to get incredibly lean. But everyone else, it's more important to try to figure out where you perform your best at. So, any questions on how weight standards are dumb and you should never use them? No? Okay. So, if we're trying to get to that optimal weight, we don't want to do it really quickly. The faster we do it, the more likely we are going to go ahead and give ourselves situations where we're losing a lot more fat mass. So in reality, we're really talking about only trying to lose maybe a pound a week, 2 pounds if we got a really big person. That's why I like the idea of going more like 1/2 to 1% of body weight a week. If anything, starting off more at that 1/2, because you still want to be making enough progress that it's discernible, but not so much that you're just ripping weight off of people. And we're really looking at about just simply a 200 to 500 calorie deficit per day. Now you can get into the deficit is really just looking at your calories in to calories out. So we can give ourselves a better deficit by either eating less, so just taking in 500 less calories, but keeping your exercise the same, or we can eat the same and just do more exercise so we have the deficit, or we can increase our exercise a little bit and decrease our calories a little bit. Any of those three options work. The key is which does your athlete have the most discipline to maintain? So for myself, when it comes to weight loss, I really enjoy hiking, so I don't really mind walking more as a means to try and lose weight. However, I don't, I mean, like anything else, you get used to the sensation of starving, as bad as it sounds. You just get, it's like, okay, like I'm hungry. What was that, Zach?
Did not know I was unmuted. My fault.
That's okay, bud. So like anything else, you've got to figure out what works for you. Some folks are much better with like, I'd rather never do a damn lick of cardio, but if I can just decrease how many calories I take in, I'm going to go ahead and do that. And like anything else, the more aggressively you do it, the more likely you are to lose lean mass and not just the fat mass you're hoping to lose. So this is the basic breakdown from a book written by a bunch of long distance runners. So not a fan. Like anything else, you probably want to see a higher amount of protein intake, and then we can possibly decrease the carbohydrate intake depending on what we're trying to do. If you're just a guy that likes picking things up and putting them down, you don't really need that many carbohydrates to support that. Sorry. If you're a long distance runner, this is a great diet for you because it's going to get you a lot of carbohydrates, but possibly not as much protein as you'd want if you're trying to increase lean mass. But once again, this is a book written by people that really like long distance running. So RDA is just, it's not the worst, but it's basically trying to give people the minimum to intake so that 95% of the population doesn't get sick. Now, I'm more about DRIs, which is really trying to make sure that we're getting in enough of everything over the course of the day to make sure, and specifically, your recommended intake is going to change based upon your activity levels and also how much sweating you're doing for when it comes to electrolytes and your goals. So we've got our major classifications of nutrients. Macronutrient means you take in a lot of it. So water is technically a macronutrient, even though it doesn't give you energy. Vitamins and minerals are micronutrients because it turns out they don't give you energy also, but they're really important as cofactors in a lot of reactions in your body. And then fats, carbs, and proteins are what you're pretty much made out of. And then fats and carbs are the major energy sources for you. So not going to waste your time in making you guys understand the basics of carbohydrates. The key thing to really understand, guys, is the fact that obviously our aerobic and anaerobic glycolytic systems are going to be running heavily on carbohydrate. If we don't get enough of it, then it turns out we're not going to have as much glycogen. If we don't have as much glycogen, we're going to fatigue out typically a bit faster in movements or exercises that obviously require us to get in enough so we're going to be able to keep up our outputs. And using things like the glycemic index, so effectively that's how quickly we're going to break down a carbohydrate and effectively get it into our bloodstream. is going to be really important as a means to try and go ahead and replenish that glycogen. So you want to do those high GI carbs whenever you want to replenish your glycogen rapidly. That's why I've got friends that literally will do candy post-workout to replenish glycogen. And then throughout the rest of the day, you want to do more moderate to low GI carbs. So this is more complex carbohydrates, things with fiber and otherwise that are going to digest far more slowly. So, and it turns out that glycemic index is influenced by things like fiber, things like fat, even whether or not the food happens to be cold or hot. So if you look over on the right, guys, you see the rate of which glycogen is going to be depleted depending on the intensity of the exercise that you have the person undergoing. So if you're really getting after it and doing effectively not even a full half hour of essentially super maximal sprinting, you can massively deplete your glycogen levels in your muscle. Whereas you can go for incredibly long periods of times at low intensity and you're not going to have an issue. So intensity and then the amount of carbs we've been able to take in pre-exercise are always going to influence our ability to perform. In fact, if we do a large bolus right before, insulin levels are going to spike. And when insulin levels spike, in turn, when we start exercising, so we've got the combination of the hormone and then the picking up of glucose into our cells, we're going to drop our blood sugar a lot faster and we're actually have a decline in performance. So if you're really trying to top off glycogen before hard practice, have your last real meal about 2 hours before your exercise bout, and don't try to do anything with exercise within effectively up until you're about 20 minutes out. Good question, Ian. What you're going to find is that things that are colder sometimes take a little bit longer to digest. And the other side is you can modify carbs through cooking. So obviously a raw potato is not going to digest as quickly as a baked potato. And then also if you are effectively toasting your food, that's going to also slow down digestion a little bit. And if you want to work out for longer, do carbs while you're exercising, especially if we're talking about aerobic performance, because that's what a lot of this stuff is, guys. I don't think a lot of you guys have a lot of interest in working out for 3 to 4 hours at a time, but these are going to be longer duration actions. So the nice thing is if you give those carbs while we're exercising, you're not going to have that hypoglycemia. You're going to be able to go ahead and take up more of it to help with recovery or help with performance. And what's really good is taking in carbohydrates pretty much right as you're finishing exercise. And that's what's going to allow you to much more rapidly resynthesize those glycogen levels, which in turn is going to allow you to perform at a much higher level. So that's once again, if you want to go, debag nutrition, for lack of a better term, you can go ahead and literally finish your workout and then pound down a bag of Skittles. Great way to get high GI carbs into you quickly and start replenishing glycogen as fast as you can. Usually we're talking about 60 to 120 grams per hour when you're not exercising. So,
Dr. Lyon,
yeah, what's up?
how does, when you swish around the carbohydrates in your mouth, how does that work essentially, if that makes sense?
Oh yeah, no, you and I have talked a little bit about the mouthwash of carbohydrates. So like anything else, you have those taste receptors that, are detecting something sweet. So in turn, the in theory mechanism there is what it's doing is your mind effectively is like, oh, I've got carbs incoming. And because of that, it's going to help a little bit with increasing performance because it's like, oh, calories are on their way. I can go a little bit more and go a little bit faster. So effectively, you're tricking your mind into you're doing better than you really are. Placebo effects.
Gotcha.
To my knowledge, this is an area of research that's still being investigated. So I reserve the right to be wrong. So fat's a great fuel source for all the other hours of the day when you're not doing anything to moderate to high intensity. Turns out they're also going to be a big component of your membranes, specifically of your nervous system. And they're really important for things like, making your steroid-based hormones, aka your sex hormones, your stress hormones, and some of your mineral corticoids. So we want to make sure we get enough fat. Saturated fat is not that big of a deal, depending on the source, and that's what we get into more in bioenergetics. Cholesterol, dietary, doesn't actually have an effect on your blood cholesterol levels unless you have genetics for it. And trans fats are pretty much bad outside of vicinic acid and conjugated linoleic acid. So you shouldn't be too afraid about getting in fat. Fat does not make you fat. Too many calories make you fat. It has nothing to do with the macronutrient source. Carbs don't make you fat. Too many calories from carbs or fat will make you fat. That's it. But caloric balance is a hard thing to hold people accountable to because it requires really good measurements and tracking. And your average person is really good at overestimating how many calories they burn through exercise and underestimating how many calories they ingested. So fats are great because they're going to allow us to spare glycogen, which is typically far more finite in the body, and allow us to go at lower intensities for very long periods of time. Now, if you do a really high fat intake, you're going to find that your body is going to start to preferentially use more fats to fuel. However, you're going to have issues. Sorry. Let me finish this line of thought, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how everyone has an opinion, much like they have another orifice on their body, and unfortunately, you don't know which one they're talking out of. So it's not so much in that eating a high-fat diet or like the ketogenic diet is a pretty popular fad these days. It's not going to necessarily make you a better athlete. If anything, if you're working hard on those glycolytic systems, you're going to maybe have some issues if you're not careful with your carbohydrate loading and approach appropriately. Long-term adaptations to high-fat diets might give you some advantages, but that's probably going to be mostly useful in people that are doing like ultra long distances. Now, yes, and one of you guys commented that someone told them that protein makes you fat. Is this the gentleman I'm currently thinking about who used to be a cheerleader here? Yeah. So the funny thing is when it comes to protein, you can go incredibly high on the intake of protein and seemingly pretty much rarely have any major negative effects on your health. Protein is one of the few macronutrient, is the only macronutrient that the research really doesn't show a excessive intake outside of people who have kidney disease or kidney failure. It doesn't seem to actually have any major issues. It's what all of your tissues in your body are made out of, aside from that phospholipid bilayer, which is made up of fat. And so you need it, and specifically if you're doing hard training, aerobic or anaerobic strength power training, you need a lot of it. You need more of it, rephrase. So for your people that are actually at 0.8 amount of grams of protein per day, that's for Homer Simpson. That's to keep somebody mouth breathing on the couch. That's not for somebody that's trying to be awesome and wreck shop. So in reality, your protein intake is going to increase from there. And it's even more important when you're trying to lose weight, but maintain your lean body mass. So specifically, if you're trying to not lose lean mass while you're trying to lose fat mass, you actually want to increase your protein intake to, the research I've seen seems to see it get up to about 2.5 grams per kilogram body mass. We're talking about the little over a gram of protein per pound of body weight. Endurance athletes, we're talking about 1.2 to 1.5 grams per kilogram of body mass, and strength athletes are usually about 1.5 to 1.8. So like anything else, this is a macronutrient that doesn't really have a lot of downsides to it, has a high thermic effect of food. Environmentally, that's more of the issue with it, just because your best protein sources also are animal sources of protein, irregardless of whatever, crazy attempts at very polarizing documentaries on the internet, game changers, that might be out there. And so the key is, like anything else, you're making sure that you're getting in the protein to match your demands. So if you really want to help increase muscle recovery, not just energy systems, but repairing the damage done to them, having protein and carbohydrates post-workout is a great thing to help with recovery. That's why you'll see people using things like skim milk or chocolate milk, because you've got both carbs and protein. Problem with that is if you have a milk allergy, kind of out. So in reality, when in doubt, you can, if you want to go debag nutrition, can of tuna fish and some fresh fruit, or you can always just do a protein shake in some type of juice. So you've got, once again, high GI carbs, it's going to be simple to digest. You've got a lot of different ways to go about it. Now, vitamins happen to be organic molecules, meaning they're carbon-based. These are really important as cofactors and catalysts in a number of reactions in your body. Some are fat soluble, meaning they can store in the fat, and so they're more likely to become issues with too high of consumption that you reach toxicity, as opposed to water soluble, you just pee out. I'm sure some of you guys have done some type of B vitamin supplement or some other multivitamin that you then went to the bathroom and it was like fluorescent, like yellow or otherwise, that's a pretty good indicator that you just took in a lot of some type of water soluble vitamin that you then peed out. The key right now, it doesn't seem to be advantageous to take in super physiological doses of any vitamin to really enhance performance or recovery. But if you have deficiency, absolutely. And so the B vitamins are really important as cofactors in pretty much all of your energy systems. Vitamin C is really important for collagen production. So that's why you'll see this supplemented sometimes with collagen proteins to actually help with soft tissue or connective tissue recovery. And then vitamin E is going to be important as an antioxidant, but the more important there is going to be more of vitamin D. Now, I'm sure some of you guys have heard of free radicals or reactive oxidative species, ROSs. These are going to be effectively created through metabolism that you create certain types of things like effectively hydrogen peroxide that inside the cell is going to do damage. Now, some of this is good because it's actually going to cause signaling inside the cell for things you want. Too much of it, now you're talking about cellular damage. And then like anything else, you're going to have a decline in performance and potentially some other negative health outcomes over long enough periods of time. So taking in antioxidants, which is usually going to be a lot of our vitamins, along with this is where glutathione is going to be incorporated. And notice, guys, beta carotene, we're really talking about vitamin A. So E and C are major antioxidants for this. Now, it did gloss over vitamin D, which is one that's most frequently going to be one that people are deficient in because you get it from the sun or vitamin D fortified foods for the most part. And seeing as how we're in that time of year where A, you're not getting as great of sun exposure as far as intensity, and B, it's cold, so you don't want to be walking around in your swimsuit outside, that you're possibly going to have issues with vitamin D deficiency. In fact, that and magnesium are the two different vitamins and minerals that are most likely to be deficient in your average human. So minerals, this is literally the good old periodic table of elements. They are going to be just a mineral. Now there's macro minerals, so we're talking about ones that we need to take in like over 100 milligrams per day, even grams in certain cases, whereas our micro minerals are going to be the ones we're taking in smaller amounts. So one of our major macro minerals outside of our electrolytes, we're talking about calcium. Obviously, hopefully you guys know the importance now between muscle contraction and action potentials along with good old bone mineral density. Now, the reason we care about our calcium intake is because the body, have I brought up the term triage or triage theory yet with the human body? Okay, so triage theory is the basic idea that the human body is just trying to survive today. It's not worrying about tomorrow. It's not worrying about the next day. It's just worrying about getting you through today. So if today you haven't taken any calcium, what do you think your body's going to prioritize? Making sure your muscles work or making sure you don't break your own bones? Exactly, Jake. The most important thing acutely, Zach, is to make sure your muscles work. Make sure you're allowed to have, or you can have action potentials. Your brain can think good. And so if you're not getting enough calcium, your body's going to start to take calcium from your bones to make sure that you have those other processes going in the body. And that's what can lead us into osteopenia. So that's that just below normal bone mineral density, and then osteoporosis, which is significantly lower. And obviously over a long enough period of time, now we're talking about fractures. So with triage theory, your body is constantly making decisions right now to keep you alive that might in turn work against you in the future. So hence why it's important on the average and over the life or the long term to make sure that you're getting enough of all of your vitamins and minerals every single day, or at least on average each day over the course of a week. Now, Iron, obviously, is another one that should be relatively straightforward for you guys. We can store it in ferritin and transferritin. So just because you didn't take enough iron today doesn't mean you're going to be anemic tomorrow. Your red blood cells tend to live about 90 days. So it's coming into a situation of if you go long enough with not getting in enough iron, you're going to effectively deplete your body's stores, and then eventually you're going to decrease your red blood cell number. And then we've got our wonderful electrolytes of sodium, potassium, and chloride. Really important for maintaining a number of different systems in the body, and we want to make sure we're taking in enough of it each day. Remember, the body does not have a way to get rid of excess sodium, only has a way to get rid of excess potassium. So like anything else, for a lot of people, they can be sensitive to high amounts of sodium, causes increase in blood pressure. But what really is fascinating there is there's some people that actually, if you give them a higher salt diet, it actually is going to decrease their blood pressure paradoxically, because turns out the human body's weird and it doesn't always respond to everything like you would expect it to. So then we got water. Turns out we're a lot of water. We need to make sure we drink enough. Once you're getting over that 9 to 10% of body weight loss through water weight, you can start risking your own life. And most of the water is inside of your cells, your body, with about a third of it being extracellular, meaning interstitial between your cells. True extracellular fluids, so we're talking about blood, lymph, digestive tract. And so you've got some different compartments there. So most of our water that we're getting in each day for fluid balance is coming from the things we drink. There's a certain amount of water in food. Things like fruits and vegetables have much higher water content compared to things like nuts and seeds. And then we do actually remember, if you remember the end of our energy systems, we create a little bit of water in carbon dioxide at the end of aerobic metabolism. Now at rest, we're going to have a certain amount of evaporation from our skin and from breathing. Now that it's cold enough, you can start to see your breath sometimes when you're outside. And then we're going to have, obviously, most of it coming through in urine, some of it tied up in our feces, and then obviously sweat. And that sweat number can massively increase depending on, obviously, our level of exercise. And we effectively just want to be in fluid balance. We want to make sure that we're not losing more fluid than we're taking in each day. And for the most part, when you're working with anybody, just follow your thirst and make sure that we're not making people abstain from water. So I've already talked about the wonders of being out in warmer temperatures and how much water you're going to go ahead and lose. Notice, guys, the sweating rate for prolonged exercise, 1,200 milliliters of water per hour. So you're really talking about when you're getting up to higher intensity exercise, we're literally going to be sweating out effectively almost about 2.5 pounds of water per hour. So you can have huge fluid losses, and that's going to scale differently depending on body size. So smaller people less, bigger people more. Now, like you'd expect, when you're dehydrated, you don't perform as well. And what do you guys would think would be the major metabolic factor of why we would see a decrease in performance because you're dehydrated? What component did we talk about before that would be the major reason why we'd have a decline in performance because we're becoming dehydrated?
Would it be like minerals or vitamins?
Think about, well, remember, we're losing fluid when we're dehydrating. So what's going on? In fact, you and I even talked about this on Monday.
Losing water or electrolytes?
Bingo. And then what major factor, or what does this affect when it comes to heart rate?
The cardiac drift.
Bingo. And with that cardiovascular drift, we're not going to be able to go as fast because we're going to be more limited on our cardiac output because we're not going to get as good a stroke volume. So we're not going to be able to go as fast when we happen to be dehydrated. And the other brutal thing is, notice, guys, as you become more and more dehydrated, you're not going to be able to sweat as well. So you're going to start to overheat. You're going to feel more uncomfortable. And hopefully that's going to slow you down so you don't pass out or hurt yourself. Now, as far as the relationships when someone happens to be doing anaerobic activity and strength performance, it's not 100% clear, but we can definitely tell you have an increased risk of soft tissue non-contact injuries, aka pulling a hamstring and otherwise. So remember, guys, as you get to be in more and more better shape, you're going to sweat out less sodium and potassium, but everything else you're going to be still losing at those previous rates. Notice, guys, you're losing some of your magnesium. Along with that potassium, there's going to be a little bit of calcium potentially in there and some zinc. So like anything else, we got to make sure that we're replacing what we're losing anytime we happen to be doing hard exercise. And so here are effectively what's going to go downwards when we start to get dehydrated, as you would suspect, which it turns out it's going to be most things. The only thing that goes up is the body temperature. So we're really not talking about a great thing to do. So when in doubt, follow your thirst. It's not going to be perfect, but like anything else, making sure that we're getting in water consistently and also getting in some water with a little bit of electrolyte is going to help more with making sure that we're going to be able to go ahead and maintain our performance and improve our own recovery. So like anything else, trying to provide fluids when you're exercising. Could be water, could be protein shake, could be Gatorade, could be a variety of things depending on what you happen to be training for, the intensity of the endeavor, and so on. And notice, guys, this is a 2 fatigue of either giving no fluid, saline, or plain water. And notice, guys, we've got the number of hours. And I don't think I see a lot of you guys out there trying to get after it for 5 hours without stopping. So a lot of these things are components to keep in mind, but only when we're going to more ends of the spectrum. So hyponatremia is whenever we're rehydrating with a lot of water, but we aren't going and adding back in those electrolytes. And so because of that, our fluids are becoming too dilute, and you can even literally risk death. And so this happens more frequently in marathoners and ultramarathoners. It's very, very rare, but you can, once again, potentially die from it because literally your action potentials, your electrochemical gradients are all being thrown off because you're not putting enough sodium back in the system. So like anything else, if you're going to work with somebody that's going to be out for long periods of time, exercising in the heat, we do want to make sure it's not just plain water, but we're trying to add in some electrolytes, specifically our sodium, potassium, and chloride. So we're going to be able to go ahead and make sure we're replacing those losses we have from sweat. Magnesium isn't a bad choice either. So if we got an athlete that decides that they want to go ahead and do some type of variation on a typical diet, at the end of the day, like anything else, all you gotta do is just make sure we're matching our demands. So if an athlete decides to be a vegetarian or a vegan, like anything else, you're going to be able to still perform just as well as long as we're making sure that we're getting in not just all the macronutrients we need, but the micronutrients. So vegan athletes, one of the hardest minerals to get enough of when we're in this type of situation is typically actually going to be more iron than anything else. Some of our B vitamins are going to be problematic, but for the most part, you're going to be able to probably get in most of everything you need. Getting enough protein can be an issue unless we're going to use some type of supplement. But like anything else, it just requires making some deliberate choices to make sure we're getting in all of those macro and micronutrients throughout the day. So touch briefly on the precomposition, making sure that we're getting in a lot of carbs for the most part to kind of max ourselves out, really topping off that glycogen, not too big of a meal. So that way it's going to have cleared our gut and be mostly digested inside of our GI so that we're not effectively having to run around with a bulk in our stomach and cause cramping. And this is going to help really try to top off those glycogen stores. Now, there's ways that you can go ahead and try to maximize glycogen, and there's 2 brutal methods to go about it. One method is you effectively taper the week of your event to where you do effectively no carbohydrate, and you actually do 2 or 3 hard workouts. Then about 3 days out, you cut all workouts and do a maximal, really high carb diet. So you're going to maximize glycogen. The other option is instead to go ahead and just taper back your training and then slowly increase your carbohydrate so that you literally in both these cases are going to be pretty close to being able to double your glycogen, which is really important for people that are going to do things like marathons and really long aerobic endurance events. So, like anything else, We want to make sure that we're getting enough carbohydrate. Too much carbohydrate is, once again, going to turn into fat. And then the other issue you can have is the power to weight ratio can get thrown off because excess glycogen, for every 1 gram of glycogen you store about 2.6 grams of water. So when you really put all that glycogen on, you're also gaining a lot of water weight, which is useful if you're going to go out and sweat a lot anyways. At least you're starting off with really topped off levels. Whereas if you're you're only going to run like a 400 meter, run an 800 meter, or you only got one event you have to do for the day, really maximizing glycogen levels is not going to help you out. The excess amount of carbohydrates on you might actually work against you because now you've got to carry around that extra amount of weight. So like anything else, we want to make sure we're getting carbohydrates all around that workout and whatever can be tolerated, and especially right when we finish, especially if we have to do multiple bouts in one day. And sporting drinks can be relatively useful. We're really just talking about water with some carbs and some electrolytes. You want to make sure that you've got enough carbohydrate in there, but not too much. If it's too high, it slows down your gastric emptying and you can possibly cause cramping. You want to use not just glucose, but fructose because it's used in a different transporter. And you can even use lactate if you feel like being really unique in how you're trying to approach it, in that you're going and using a different transporter than just the glucose and fructose. Glucose and galactose use the same transporter, and sodium works as a SIM port to get it into the body. So you can at some point saturate all of those receptors, and that's why using fructose on top of that can be useful. And lactate also uses its own transporter. So going higher there again can be useful. And so when in doubt, something that doesn't have that strong of a flavor, isn't giving like that cotton mouth, that really bad aftertaste, and like anything else, you can take and drink as much as you want, whenever you want, and you're not going to have issues with cramping. So just a little bit of experimentation. So that was some pretty quick brute force running through nutrition. It's exciting. What questions do you guys have about that? Okay, well, since nobody's giving me anything right now, quick question to throw up in the poll. Does fat make you fat? Awesome. Do carbohydrates make you fat? Good, absolutely. And then, are proteins bad for your health? That's okay, Nick, that's okay. It should be under the participants tab if you can do that. Good. Sorry, those are my real big pet peeves that people on occasion be like, well, since we know fat makes you fat, no, we don't. That's not how that works. And thank you, Ian. Absolutely. It's not a bad thing unless you've got kidney problems. Some of the cooler research I've seen is from Antonio. Of course, I'm going to forget his last name. Used to be the president of the ISSN. I don't know if he still is, but it'll come to me. But effectively, he was able to do a lot of research looking at super high. So we're talking 4 grams per kilogram of body mass per day of protein intake, and even did blood draws, looked at bone mineral density in both men and women. For one example, it was for the first 2 years at 3 grams per kilogram of body mass, and there are no negative outcomes. Jose Antonio. There you go. That's the researcher. So protein's not bad. But let's talk about ergogenic aids, because that makes me happy, and I will probably swear excessively as we're going through here. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of research on ergogenics, kind of what they are. Then we're going to talk about the hardcore pharmacological, aka we get to pull out the needles and start stabbing ourselves. And obviously how they're going to be, some are hormonal, some are physiological, and some are nutritional. So this is the time for you guys to ask me all the questions you guys want to, because I really enjoy talking about it. But an ergogenic is literally something that just increases the amount of work you can do. An ergolytic is something that causes you to do less work. So for example, we're in higher education. We don't drug test here. Instead, there's a lot of people that abuse Adderall, caffeine, and other amphetamine class medications and drugs in order to enhance their performance. But it's okay because we have a double standard. In athletics, we get all poopy if you use things that really help you perform better. But in higher ed, you can, if you don't see a coffee pot in each break room for each department, I don't even think they actually are a department. So what you're going to find is amphetamines are a great example of things that are going to help you do work. Now, whereas ergolytic, if you were to say, try to drink on the job, meaning alcohol, ethanol, another drug, you are going to not be able to probably do as much high quality intellectual work, much less studying for whatever exams you have, because it turns out your brain don't think good when you're drunk. So some are pharmacological, and these are, once again, drugs. Some are hormones, which are going to be ones your body produces or analogs to them. Some are physiological agents. So these are going to be different types of nutritional supplements. And then, physiological sometimes is going to be application of different things like extra oxygen or otherwise, but they don't really work as well. Now, in reality, ergogenics are not always things that are really bad like drugs. Sometimes things are ergogenic, like effectively wearing a weight belt. So like anything else, they have to be proven in the peer-reviewed literature. Unfortunately, we find a lot of areas that there's not a lot of good research showing these changes occurring from one side to the other. So hence the pseudo-ergogenic, where people think certain things happen. This would be like those magnetic bracelets people wore for a while. Gosh, what other things out there that people...
Did those things even do anything?
No, they didn't do a damn thing. That's what's known as the placebo effect, where effectively it's something that doesn't have a real effect, but people think it does, or think that it does. So like a placebo is, sometimes they'll give people a sugar pill, but their own psychology will convince them that they're on the real thing. And so this is used in a lot of double-blind studies, meaning you give one group the actual supplement or drug or et cetera, and you give the other group a placebo, which is just a sugar pill, and effectively see, is there a significant difference between the two? Because your psychology is incredibly powerful. If I remember correctly, the placebo study for Viagra, the placebo worked like 2/3 of the time. So don't get me wrong, Viagra worked 100% of the time, but the placebo was pretty damn effective also. And it's even worse when you look at research on things like SSRIs and a number of other psychological medicines, where typically the placebos, they work, unfortunately, almost as well as the actual medications. And so that's really disheartening. But so what's really cool is this research on the side. This is an older study where they were actually giving individuals anabolics. And so they had a group of individuals train hard for 7 weeks. The group that were able to put on the greatest amount of numbers on their maxes were then allowed to be into the study for the next 4 weeks. And you guys can read where it says placebo, but they were told they were taking Dianabol, which is a pretty potent oral anabolic. Now, here's the thing. Notice how they made more progress in 4 weeks being told they were on steroids than they made in the first 7 weeks when they were clean. That's literally how big of an effect that psychology really makes on people's training and performance. And that's one thing to keep in mind, guys, which is placebos are very, very potent. And all of us can fall prey to thinking placebos work. And it's not just placebo effect that increases your performance. You also have the nocebo effect where you decrease your performance. And I'm sure every single one of you have fallen prey to the nocebo effect at least once in your life. The nocebo effect is whenever you're given some form of treatment that tells you you're going to do worse, and then you turn that into a self-fulfilling prophecy that you're going to do worse. And sadly enough, this most frequently comes up in things like education, where people have convinced themselves that they're bad at math or bad at this or bad at that. Yeah, see, there's a lot of things to unpack whenever you're looking at that placebo effect for increasing performance, Tyler. First and foremost, if you're told you're on anabolics, you're probably going to attack the weight harder. So you're going to train harder, which in turn is typically more productive. Second of all, you're going to find that individuals, when they think they're on drugs, they're probably going to start to do other things other behaviors to enhance their performance, meaning they're going to probably make sure they're eating more, they're going to make sure they're sleeping more, they're going to make sure that they're doing their best to recover from the training. So that's the thing that becomes really muddy with free living humans, which is, yes, the placebo effect works, but all of the mechanisms of action are really hard to get at. And probably a number of them are simply related to the fact of we create a self-fulfilling prophecy. But does the nocebo effect idea make sense to you guys? Because this is really important, because you've probably had that really bad coach, bad teacher, somebody else in your life that told you you're bad at something. And it's like, you, man, it's the first time I try it. I'm going to suck at everything the first time I try it. Like, technically, all of us suck at riding a unicycle. Does anyone here know how to ride a unicycle? Anyone know how? So, since I'm not seeing any yeses, it's safe to say that if we all try to ride a unicycle, we're all going to suck at it. Now, if we have a jerk of a coach, it's like, well, you're always going to suck at it. Be like, dude, it's the first time I ever tried. Catherine, with that attitude, you would, but I believe in you. And first and foremost, you make it sound like we're just going to put you on the unicycle at the top of a hill that also happens to be littered with, like, I don't know, like broken glass on there. Like anything else, you put a progression, you teach people how to do things. If you just have people immediately start off in the deep end, like, hey, welcome to math, we're going to start with calculus. Like, no wonder they struggle. But keep this in mind, guys, because you're going to have people that are talking themselves out of performance more often than you're going to have people talking themselves into doing better on activities. And be careful about all the things you think, because they're not always true. And quite frequently, people can get into their own essentially negative loops that keep telling them that they're bad at one thing or another with really no real proof to back that up. So the issue that we also find with ergogenics is it's really hard to do good research on it, because it turns out it's not really that ethical to give people a lot of steroids and figure out what's going on. Now, there's a lot of pro bodybuilders, pro strongmen, pro athletes, a lot of people out there that use a crap ton of anabolics. And obviously they are able to put on a lot of muscle mass. But like anything else, we've got those limits of we need to approach it with a lot of controls. We need to be double blind. We need to make sure we're not pushing physiology and possibly hurting people. So like anything else, there's a lot of things out there, and SARMs is one that's most recently on the market that probably have some positive doping abilities as far as it becoming ergogenic, but there's not really a lot of literature out there showing their efficacy. So WADA has, the World Anti-Doping Association has their basic code, which is if it's able to increase sports performance, chance to harm the athlete, and violates the spirit of the sport, which is probably the most ridiculous thing I've ever come across, because lifting weights has the ability to enhance sports performance. It also has the potential to hurt you, and violates the spirit of sport is a real man-made construct, which gets real wonky real fast. I am not for the ridiculous use and abuse of anabolic agents and a number of other drug-tested compounds, but I am for having a true, honest conversation about what we mean by the spirit of sport. So I like numbers that we can quantify and look at when we say like, well, this is just not fair. Well, let's face reality here, guys, right now. Would it be fair to watch Catherine having to try to run a football by Raquan? Yeah, turns out, though both of them are human, much like Shaquille O'Neal and Peter Dinklage are both human, one of them has a number of advantages over the other that would make that matchup obviously incredibly unfair. So how we choose fairness, what defines it, how much of an advantage we are acceptable with if that's being purely genetic, but we're uncomfortable with it being synthetic, is a very strange line to draw in the sand. But we're going to dive more into this whenever we meet up later. So, you know what? If with the proper positioning and setup using biomechanics, there is a chance, not a great one. So stay safe out there, guys. Thanks for listening. And then we will see each other on Friday, where we're going to talk through the lactate lab and hopefully enjoy weather that's not too cold and or awful outside. Have a great day, guys. Stay safe. Bye-bye.